Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. U.S. President Donald Trump says he wants the U.S. to take over the war-shattered Gaza Strip. Plus, as a trade war with the U.S. has been paused, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canadians more united than ever. And Alberta Premier Danielle Smith with a different take on the issues of tariffs. Legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. There are reports of another airliner collision coming out of the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport in Washington State. The video surfaces showing the Japan Airlines plane that seemingly hits or grazes the tail of a parked Delta Airlines plane. There are no reports of any injuries, but the Daily Mail is reporting there were 142 passengers on the Delta flight, which was on its way to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. According to the company, passengers were being moved to a new aircraft. One of the passengers told Richmond News that the entire plane shook during the collision and that an aircraft came up behind them from their window seat, looking like it was very close. Then a few seconds later, there was a very loud noise and the plane shook. This comes only a week following the mid-air collision between an American Airlines passenger jet and a Black Hawk helicopter, military helicopter, right outside of Washington National Airport in D.C. that killed 67 people. And only 5 days later, a medevac plane crashed into a Philadelphia neighborhood that killed 7 people and injured 19. Well, Lethbridge police have charged a 38-year-old woman in connection with the death of her 13-year-old son. On December 26, police responded to a suspicious death of the boy, whose body was found on Mayor McGrath Drive along the 1600 block. Throughout the investigation, it was determined that around 5 p.m. on Christmas Day, the mother and her son were using drugs when the boy overdosed in their residence. A hang-up call to 911 was placed by a male acquaintance. According to police, the mother hid the boy's body and lied regarding his whereabouts to avoid apprehension. The mother and her son allegedly left a residence that evening and spent the night on the street. The mother then reported the next day that she found her son deceased. Blanche Isabel Irene Fick is charged with criminal negligence causing death and failing to provide the necessaries of life and is scheduled to appear in court on February the 7th. According to Health Canada, over 49,000 Canadians have died of opioid overdoses since 2016. And in late October of 2024, the RCMP uncovered the largest and most sophisticated fentanyl and methamphetamine drug superlab in Canada in Falkland, British Columbia, with associated locations in Surrey, BC. Police reported that they found enough fentanyl and ingredients to make over 95 million lethal doses. Today, Pierre Poilievre announced his party's proposal that would address the trafficking, production, and distribution of fentanyl in Canada.
As part of my Canada First plan, that common sense Conservatives will bring mandatory prison sentences. There will be life sentences for anyone caught trafficking, producing, or exporting over 40 milligrams of fentanyl. 40 milligrams is enough to kill 20 people. Anyone who's involved in trafficking that amount of fentanyl will get a life sentence. We will lock them up and we will throw away the key. And 15 years for traffickers caught with between 20 milligrams and 40 milligrams will be the new mandatory sentence.
And Poilievre pointed out that the Liberal government, with support of the NDP and Bloc parties, passed Bill C-5, which eliminated mandatory jail time for the production and trafficking of hard drugs like fentanyl. U.S. President Donald Trump made a stunning proposal to forcibly transfer hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip and develop it as a tourist destination. The plan, however, faces many obstacles. Joe Fetterman with the Associated Press has more.
President Donald Trump has unveiled a new and controversial plan for the future of the Gaza Strip. Trump says that after Israel ends its war in Gaza, the territory's entire population, that's about 2 million Palestinians, should be transferred to other countries. He says the U.S. would then step in and run Gaza and oversee a lengthy reconstruction process. Now, this idea of mass transfer is something that traditionally has been limited to the far-right fringes of Israeli politics. Trump is now bringing this idea out into the mainstream. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was with Trump when he unveiled the plan at the White House. Netanyahu has welcomed it, and his hardline allies in Israel are ecstatic over the plan. But outside of Israel, we are seeing almost zero support for the plan. Key allies of the U.S. in the region, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, are all against this. Other allies around the world, Australia, and adversaries like China also say this is unworkable. They all say the only solution in this region is a two-state solution, an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel.
Meanwhile, residents in the Gaza Strip rejected Trump's proposal to permanently resettle the enclave's population and have the U.S. take ownership in redeveloping the territory. One Gaza resident says dying here is better than going anywhere else because you have nothing after losing your land, country, and home. Although it is demolished, our homes are worth the whole world to us. We have lived and seen a lot, but since we have seen our homes, all of the sadness in us has left. Another Gaza resident says, quote, "My response to these statements by Donald Trump, even if it is happening, is that we are not leaving. We have seen death with our own eyes, and we didn't flee to the south. We have seen the artillery bombardment next to us, killing and injuring people, and we stayed. We didn't leave," end quote. As President Trump continues to hold out the threat of steep tariffs on Canadian imports in exchange for a safer border, Federal Trade Minister Mary Ng says her government's Team Canada approach is working.
We've probably done over 1,300, meetings and interactions with businesses and stakeholders, labor organizations, governors, legislators at all levels, bipartisan, Republicans as well as Democrats, to really make the point with those who are those businesses or those labor leaders who either on the United States side count on Canada as a big customer. We are the top customer for 36 United States. I keep reminding people that we buy more from the United States. Canada buys more from the United States than Japan, than China, than the United Kingdom combined.
Echoing those sentiments during a Lunar New Year event in Ottawa Tuesday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Canadians are more united than ever as a Canada-U.S. trade war has been paused. He says his government will keep fighting until the threat of tariffs is off the table.
I've never been more optimistic about Canada's future. We're not out of the woods yet. We need to continue to pull together and be there for each other. But as I announced yesterday, we reached an agreement with the United States to pause the proposed tariffs against Canada, along with our countermeasures, and working together to tackle the scourge of fentanyl. And, of course, we will keep working until those tariffs are off the table altogether.
As Trudeau has been working to appease Trump with border security measures, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been in the U.S. on a kind of a diplomatic mission to address the tariffs that have been threatened against Canada. Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, explains more.
Smith is crediting her diplomatic campaign with the original tariff was supposed to be 25% across all goods coming from Canada. When it was announced last weekend, it was a 10% tariff on energy exports, which of course would have included a lot of Alberta oil and gas. And Smith is crediting her diplomacy with that reduced rate for some of those products. So we don't obviously know what's going to happen at the end of this 30-day period, but the Alberta government's been big on diplomacy and they don't show any signs of slowing down on that front.
Tyler Dawson also gives us the scoop of how conservative activist group Take Back Alberta has been fined over $100,000 by Elections Alberta. All that and more coming up later on in the program. Well, the Alberta Utilities Commission has approved the application from the City of Medicine Hat to obtain ownership of the proposed Saumis Solar Park project. Medicine Hat generates and distributes their own electricity at a retail level to residents. The project is meant to diversify the electric assets. The solar project will be located at a 1,600-acre site in the north end of Medicine Hat. The city says their next steps are to apply for an amendment to the Utilities Commission to decrease the proposed size and output of the solar.
The existing approval that the Alberta Utilities Commission had supported is for 325 megawatts. That compares against our existing natural gas fleet that's closer to 300 megawatts. So the city does not intend to build out the full 325 megawatts anytime soon. In fact, part of the approval we've just received under our exemption of the Electric Utilities Act, we had to request to build a certain amount, and we've requested to build up to 75 megawatts, so much smaller than the current approval. And that represents an opportunity to phase the project. We don't want to build too much too soon and overwhelm the existing natural gas supply that we have and introduce congestion into our system.
Preliminary costs have been modeled, and the project awaits budget approvals from City Council in the coming weeks before a construction timetable can be given. Well, Streets Alive Missions is running out of donations of winter clothing and is looking for help from the public to restock during this current cold snap.
It's very cold out, and as such, we have been going through all of our winter gear supplies. We did just bring our last load over from our repurposed center and sorting center of jackets and of winter good layerable clothing. We are desperately running low on things like that. So we need winter jackets, we need hoodies, we need sweaters, we need good pants, shoes. We need it all right now. I think we've been very fortunate up to this point this winter. It's been relatively mild, and maybe we got a little used to it, but winter always kind of shows her teeth at some point.
Streets Alive says that renovations to their newly purchased facility are now underway. CEO Cam Kissick says this would greatly increase the capacity of all services that they offer to the homeless and financially insecure. As the temperatures drop, we need to remember that home fires become even more frequent during this time of year when we encounter cold snaps. To keep our guard up when it comes to safety, Troy Hicks, Chief Fire Marshal with the Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services, shares practical tips for heating our homes, plugging in our vehicles, and using wood-burning fireplaces, to name a few.
Carbon monoxide is a deadly killer. It is colorless, it's odorless. It is produced when you end up having any solid fuel appliances burning, and when they don't burn and support complete combustion of the materials, that's when you get carbon monoxide. Make sure your home is ventilated, and what I mean by that is when you have your air intakes and your ventilation pipes that come out of your home for your furnaces or hot water tanks, go have a look. With the buildup of some moisture and colder temperatures, you can get ice that hang out of them, and there's always a possibility that it will plug them. That's not allowing now the ventilation to happen, which is going to be filling your home with carbon monoxide. Make sure you have a carbon monoxide detector in your home. If you ever smell gas in your home, call 911, evacuate your home. When we're talking about space heaters or wood-burning fireplaces, you want to keep a 1 meter clearance around them for at least 1 meter away from any appliances. Just due to the risk of they could heat up, they could dry out, and they could catch fire. You also want to keep a 1 meter kid-free zone around there too, to minimize the risk of kids getting a little too close, maybe playing and not realizing how close they are to the heating appliance. The stove and oven in your home is not designed to heat your home.
According to Canadian Red Cross, house fires are most likely to occur between December and March. The city of Lethbridge is announcing a new strategic plan for Henderson Lake Park, and the city's Parks Department wants to gather feedback from residents to help shape this plan because as the park continues to age, community needs may evolve. The document will guide future planning, improvement projects, and the holistic long-term vision. You can share your thoughts with the city in the Henderson Park Strategic Plan survey, which is open until February 28th. To complete the survey or learn more about the project, visit getinvolvedlethbridge.ca. Siphon leaks in the river valley have been repaired and are now fully operational. The leaking was first noticed on January 8th when it caused a sinkhole and wastewater to surface. Crews found a crack in one of the 3 lines. After the initial repair, workers found that a second pipe was also leaking. They successfully fixed it on February 1st, and they have not discovered any further leaks. Video inspections of all 3 pipes also found no additional issues, and the site is being monitored for any more leaks. The repair area remains closed to the public. Lethbridge's police chief is a little more decorated these days. The King Charles III Coronation Medal was awarded to Chief Shaheen Medizadeh in recognition of his outstanding performance at the helm of the institution he leads. Medizadeh expressed what this recognition means to him and his team.
It's very humbling for me, but I always take pride in the work that we do as a team, and we continue to try to look at ways we can serve the community better. It's not just me, it's a whole team that provides that service to the community, and I'm very proud to be part of that team. Got 35 years plus in policing, and from the second I put on the uniform, it's never been about awards or recognition. It's about what I can do to keep any community I've been a member of safe and promote public safety. I don't look forward to do things because of a medal or recognition. That's my job. I often say to everyone, I'm a public servant, which means servant of our citizens. So, until I put this uniform on, and my commitment is that I'm going to be serving them with honor. Both myself and the team as a whole can serve the community better and improve everyone's quality of life.
Recipients of the King Charles III Medal are recognized for their exceptional contributions to their communities. The medal was established in 2023 to honor individuals who have demonstrated outstanding service in a variety of fields. And we wish our congratulations to Chief Medizadeh. The Calgary Zoo has announced a nearly $16 million plan to redevelop some wildlife habitats ahead of its centennial in 2029. The zoo announced Monday it would begin an expansion of its Exploration Asia zone next month with larger and improved habitats for some of its more prominent residents.
The redevelopment is going to feature expansive new dynamic habitats for our snow leopards, our red pandas, and our red-crowned cranes. Also going to tease you that we're going to get a new species that we're going to talk about later this year. This phase 1 of this project is estimated right now at $15.8 million, and we are funding that internally. This is the first of a series of projects. We're constantly looking into how we update our facilities, and as we approach our centennial, we have a cascade of projects that we'll be focused on and working with the community to find funding for.
Oh, those animals are so cute. The project is scheduled to be complete by summer of 2026. Should be fun to check that out. We do need to take a quick break, but we're talking weather when we return, and it's staying a bit chilly. Our daytime highs almost as low as our nighttime lows. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Not too much difference between our daytime highs and our nighttime lows. That's because it is just plain cold out. And even though we're only seeing a 15-kilometer-per-hour wind, the wind chill factor is still staying in the minus 30s, which means, risk of frostbite. And things are about to get a little tiny bit warmer by Thursday. And by that, I mean things will go back into that seasonal range. So minus 11 is more seasonable for this time of year. It's more on the low end of it. Clear skies, though, and then minus 25 tomorrow night. As we get into Friday, minus 13, mix of sun and cloud, minus 10 for Saturday with clear skies, minus 15 on Sunday with a chance of flurries. Actually, flurries beginning Saturday evening, so 60% chance, and that's going to go straight through Sunday night. Back to minus 16 on Monday and minus 10 on Tuesday. So we're still staying in those minuses, kind of more in this range, though. Average high for this time of year, 1, average low, minus 11. Many days going below that, though. 18 was our record high on this day. That happened back in 1984 in Lethbridge. And Lethbridge saw its coldest on record, minus 40. That happened back in 1914. Sun rose this morning at 7:58. Sunset this afternoon at 5:33 p.m. So we're now looking at 9 hours and 35 minutes of daylight. I believe it's 3 minutes longer than we saw yesterday. High of 2 degrees in Victoria. Tomorrow we're seeing periods of snow, clear skies in Vancouver, 1 degree for the high, minus 12 in Edmonton with periods of light snow ending in the morning. Clear skies in Calgary, mainly sunny there, minus 10 for the high. As we look to the rest of the prairies here, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, we are seeing some precipitation, some low pressure systems happening here. So lots of snow, 2 to 4 centimeters expected in Saskatoon, minus 16 for the high there. Regina seeing minus 18 and some flurries there as well as some blowing snow. So actually Regina was under a snowfall warning earlier today, but that should be ending and only seeing light periods of snow tomorrow. Same thing for Winnipeg. Toronto seeing 2 to 4 centimeters of snow, 2 degrees for the high. 5 to 10 centimeters expected tomorrow in Ottawa, minus 4, minus 5 in Montreal with 5 centimeters expected there as well. So lots of snow in the central portion of the country there. Atlantic Canada, Fredericton seeing some periods of snow there, minus 1. Also in Halifax, minus 5 in Charlottetown, and same thing for St. John's with a mix of sun and cloud there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Insolvencies in Canada are up 12.1% last year compared to 2023, as business liquidations push even higher to close to 30%. The Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy says construction, transportation and warehousing, and accommodation and food services saw the largest increase in 2024. The Canadian Association of Insolvency and Restructuring Professionals says business and consumer insolvencies reached a 15-year high through 2024. In the fourth quarter of 2024, insolvencies rose 5.2% year over year to more than 35,000 filings. A BC Supreme Court judge has barred WestJet from capping travelers' reimbursement for meals and accommodations. Travelers forced to find a hotel room or a restaurant because of a canceled flight were told the airline had maximum amounts for meals and accommodations. WestJet says it removed the expense ceiling in August and has no plan to revive the old policy. The judge ruled passengers would be harmed if WestJet continued telling their customers their expenses were capped. The Canadian company that processed plant-based milk linked to a deadly listeria outbreak is trying to sell 2 of its facilities. Toronto-based Jariki was granted court protection from creditors and is trying to liquidate the Pickering, Ontario plant where the outbreak started. At least 20 people were infected across the country and 3 people died between August 2023 and last July. Jariki says it has potential buyers for turnkey sale of its Toronto and Delta, BC facilities. Purolator has acquired one of Canada's largest customs brokers to boost its trade expertise in the Trump era. Canada Post-owned Purolator has bought Livingston International for an undisclosed amount. Purolator Chief Executive John Ferguson says about 30% of Purolator's business stems from cross-border deliveries. Despite recent tariff threats, Ferguson believes trade between the 2 countries will rise in the coming decades and expects Purolator will benefit. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 290 points on the day to finish at 25,569. The Dow was up 317 points to 44,873. The S&P 500 was up 23 points to 6061, and the Nasdaq was up 38 points to finish at 19,692. West Texas Intermediate oil was down $1.50 to $71.20 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 10 cents to $3.35 US. Gold was up $25.78 to $28.6667 US an ounce, and silver was up 24 cents to $32.30 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel. Barley is at $6.64. Canola is at $14.51, and corn is at $8.63 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.73 to $203.60. Feeder cattle March contract was up $2.48 to $270.73. Lean hogs were up $1.58 to $86.65. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $69.90 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, there are reports of another airliner collision coming out of the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport in Washington state. The video surfacing on social media shows a Japan Airlines plane that seemingly hits or grazes the tail of a parked Delta Airlines plane. There are no reports of any injuries, but the Daily Mail is reporting there were 142 passengers on the Delta flight, which was on its way to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. According to the company, passengers were being moved to a new aircraft. This comes only a week following the mid-air collision between an American Airlines passenger jet and a Black Hawk military helicopter outside of Washington National Airport in D.C. that killed 67 people. And only 5 days after a medevac plane crashed into a Philadelphia neighborhood that killed 7 people and injured 19. Well, coming up after the break, we hear from the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, about Danielle Smith's diplomacy efforts in the U.S. and how conservative activist group Take Back Alberta has been fined over $100,000 by Elections Alberta. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page to check out a number of our stories and interviews. Well, lately there seems to be a unity fight between Alberta and the rest of Canada, with the threat of tariffs dangling over the country and our premier securing the Alberta-Montana border. She's also encouraging other premiers to get on board with this because it might be the only action that avoids tariffs. So to discuss all of this, all of what's happening in Alberta between tariffs plus announcements about utilities and daycare, not to mention a COVID-19 report, I'm going to bring in Tyler Dawson. He is the legislative reporter with the National Post. Tyler, welcome back. So much to talk about this week.
It is the news year has started off with a bang.
It sure has. Okay, so firstly, Canada now has avoided tariffs on its exports to the U.S. for at least 30 days, right? So the announcement made on Monday after a pair of phone calls between the Prime Minister and U.S. President Donald Trump. And so had the tariffs gone into effect on Tuesday as expected, people are saying that it could have had devastating consequences for the Alberta economy. But our Premier, Danielle Smith, had a different take on the issue. So what did she do and how did she react, Tyler?
Well, so Danielle Smith has been on this sort of hearts and minds campaign for weeks, months, really, actually, meeting with her counterparts in the United States, whether that's governors, Congress people. She of course, made an appearance at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Palm Beach resort, a couple weeks ago. She's sort of been all over, sort of campaigning against the imposition of tariffs, engaging in what she's calling diplomacy. She's been really big on the idea that there's a diplomatic solution to this problem, that this is not a case where retaliatory tariffs or shutting off energy exports or something like that are going to free Canada from this tariff threat. And as you alluded to, the border does seem to have sort of been the thing that did it. Following the phone calls between Trump and Trudeau on Monday, Canada had announced all this stuff actually weeks and weeks ago, such as a $1.3 billion border security plan and things like that. Whether Trump thinks those things happened because of him, I have no idea. But at any rate, the border seems to be the thing that has avoided this for now. From the Alberta perspective, Smith is crediting her diplomatic campaign with so the original tariff was supposed to be 25% across all goods coming from Canada. When it was announced last weekend, it was a 10% tariff on energy exports, which of course would have included a lot of Alberta oil and gas. And Smith is crediting her diplomacy with that reduced rate for some of those products. So we don't obviously know what's going to happen at the end of this 30-day period, but the Alberta government's been big on diplomacy and they don't show any signs of slowing down on that front.
Mm-hmm. So she felt like it was a small victory there on their part. All right. Well, so of course we were talking about this 30-day reprieve on tariffs, but it hasn't stopped Alberta's diplomatic efforts, obviously. So there are several ministers and MLAs currently or recently abroad. So what does Alberta's diplomatic effort look like right now, Tyler?
Let's start with the person who's wrapped up. Todd Loewen was in Germany for a hunting show to sort of pitch Alberta's hunting and tourism economy to the Germans. And this was also in advance of an auction that's happening in a couple weeks in Salt Lake City around special hunting licenses. So trying to get Germans down to Salt Lake City to bid on some of these special licenses. So he wrapped that up, I think, on Tuesday, maybe. Yesterday, I believe it was, there were 3 ministers who flew down to Washington for the National Prayer Breakfast. I believe it was Adriana LaGrange, Dan Williams, and I think Nathan Newdorf was the 3rd. So they're down there for the National Prayer Breakfast, big annual event in Washington, and they're going to be meeting with Congress people and things like that. Then you have 2 other MLAs whose names are suddenly escaping me. I think Shane Getson and who's the other one? It doesn't matter, I guess. They're down in Oregon. They're in Salem, Oregon for sort of a Pacific state sort of meeting. It's a nonprofit organization that puts on this big event every year. So they're down there talking about partnerships between Alberta and the Pacific northwestern sort of Pacific U.S. states. Of course, actually, a lot of Alberta oil ends up down there. The Trans Mountain pipeline that runs out to Burnaby, BC, actually forks down to the south and feeds refineries in Washington and Oregon and California as well. So lots going on there. Then there's Rebecca Schultz, who's in Japan right now, and she's not there, as far as I'm aware, to go skiing. Although if you follow any professional skiers or snowboarders on social media, you will know that Japan has like 15 feet of snow right now, and the skiing's incredible. But at any rate, she is there to talk about Canada or Alberta's trading relationship with Japan, talking about energy, talking about our environmental record, all those sorts of things. So that's where she is. I think that's everyone who's abroad right now, although Danielle Smith is also expecting to go back to the United States, back to Washington next week as part of this delegation from all of Canada's premiers to meet with lawmakers in Washington. She's also going, I believe, at the end of the month to the National Governors Association, I think is what it's called, to meet with state governors from around the United States. So huge diplomatic push happening in Alberta right now on a variety of fronts. We've got hunting, we've got engagement in Japan, we've got the northwestern U.S. states, and we've got people down in Washington. So a ton going on the diplomatic front from Alberta politicians right now.
Oh, sounds like it. Okay, so switching gears here, Take Back Alberta. Now, this is the conservative activist group headed by David Parker. They've been fined more than $100,000 by Elections Alberta. So apparently they ran afoul of election rules. So what exactly happened there, Tyler?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of rules around bookkeeping and donation accounting and financial reporting and spending rules during an election campaign. There's all sorts of rules that exist for groups that are involved in the Alberta political scene. And those are the rules sort of fundamentally that Take Back Alberta ran afoul of. Now, people will probably remember Take Back Alberta from mainly probably the campaign actually to get Danielle Smith elected as leader of the United Conservative Party after Jason Kenney resigned. It became this sort of quite powerful grassroots for sort of capitalizing on some of the anger after the pandemic, capitalizing on some of the concerns over Alberta's energy industry, brought a lot of new people into the United Conservative Party fold. It's also been quite controversial, frankly, in political circles and in circles on the left that don't like the views of this group. But they ran afoul of these laws that we just discussed. And David Parker, the head of the group, has personally been fined. I think it's about $7,500. So a pretty hefty legal bill for that group. It's unclear what the future might look like for them following the levying of these fines. So I guess we'll wait and see on that front. But a pretty significant crackdown, so to speak, on what was at one point a very major player in Alberta political circles.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned the controversy there, and also controversial, this recently released report from the Alberta government, the province's COVID-19 response. This was highly controversial. So the task force that wrote the report was led by Dr. Gary Davidson, a Red Deer doctor, right? And he's argued in the past that COVID numbers were inflated to justify public health restrictions. So when the task force was announced, Danielle Smith said that she wanted contrarian opinions, and well, I guess she got them then, didn't she, Tyler?
She certainly did. Yeah. This was really controversial even in the beginning. And as you say, Smith was asked directly about this. She said she wanted views from people who'd sort of been shouted down during the pandemic. And this was bound to lead to some controversial outcomes. The report, for example, argued that there should have been more leeway for Alberta doctors to prescribe some off-label medications, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, two medications that were talked about a lot during the pandemic, but that were not sort of shown to be beneficial, particularly in treating COVID-19. There was talk in the report of ending COVID-19 vaccinations for youth. Things like that. It really caught the attention of the medical community for sure. They simply said, look, this is completely offside with where the science is right now. This was a report with conclusions, looking for evidence, that sort of thing. And it's put Premier Danielle Smith in a little bit of a tough spot. One of the things that was a challenge for her leading into the 2023 election was the perception among Albertans that she was sort of part of this fringe, I guess you could say, on COVID-19 that was, vaccine hesitant and was concerned about public health measures and those sorts of things. And that probably harmed her election efforts in 2023, even though she won. Since then, she's, I think, tried to govern largely in the mainstream, on the mainstream sort of issues that are concerning Albertans. We've seen that in the fights with Ottawa. We've seen that in the defense of the oil and gas sector, those sorts of things, the sort of issues that Albertans expect from the government. Now, every time COVID rears its ugly head again, in the form of a report like this, which is something that only really the people who are still angry about COVID want to talk about. I mean, I don't think the vast majority of Albertans want to be relitigating any of these questions. It puts her in a tough spot because she gets asked about it by reporters. She says something that maybe is controversial, maybe it isn't, but she's either making some of these people mad or she's alienating a proportion of the sort of the larger Alberta electorate. So it just puts her in a sticky situation.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Just recently, the Alberta government launching an advertising campaign around electricity bills, of all things. So the province announced there will be a rate of last resort when it comes to electricity prices. And it's a little confusing, but it will be set at 12 cents per kilowatt hour and will be the rate that Albertans get if they don't choose a specific rate. So, but it apparently is not necessarily the cheapest rate. And that's why the province is launching that campaign. So, to tell people about this, so maybe can you kind of fill us in a little bit more here?
Yeah, so there's been this effort to sort of bring down electricity prices for Albertans. And so the government set this rate of last resort that's 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Basically, if you don't sign up for a specific rate or you forget to renew or whatever, they're going to stick you on that rate instead of you getting stuck at a much higher rate, for example. However, if you pay attention to what the rates look like daily, 12% or 12 cents per kilowatt hour is probably actually kind of expensive. So this campaign is basically saying, hey, don't just go with the rate of last resort. It is there to help, but it's not going to be the best deal. So this advertising campaign is really just to reach people that might otherwise not know this. Perhaps that's newcomers, perhaps that's seniors who are not regularly checking rates on the internet, on the EPCOR website or something like that. So it's really just to remind people that, yeah, this exists. Yeah, it's going to be helpful. No, it's probably not the best rate. So do your own research a little bit on it. Because, of course, this is meant to bring costs down for people, right? And the political consequences, if everyone ends up on the rate of last resort, they might be seeing their bills go up and they'll be mad at the government about it. So an advertising campaign probably makes a little bit of sense to raise awareness about these changes.
Other things that the government has been announcing, so parents caught off guard by new changes to the way that daycare subsidies work. So parents across the province, regardless of income, will now be paying that flat fee of more than $300. So that can be substantial for some families. But, now this means that more money is going directly to daycare so that they can then pay workers better and keep operations afloat. So, it's just another step in the the march towards cheaper daycare, but not everyone obviously is happy about this, Tyler, right?
Certainly, yeah. There are people who have seen their daycare bills go up as a result of this. There are people who will see their daycare bills go down as a result of this. It's leveling the playing field. The criticism of it is that it's essentially not means tested. In other words, your rate does not go down if you make less money or go up if you make more money. If you have a combined family income of $190,000, you're paying the same as a family with a combined income of $45,000. So that's sort of where the controversy comes into it. But it is sort of a more stable, sustainable, transparent sort of set of funding. At least that's what the government is arguing. Because, of course, there's been some controversy over the past year where daycares are saying, well, we're not making enough money under this $15 a day daycare program to keep the doors open, to pay staff, to be involved. So some have been trying to sort of leave the publicly funded daycare system and go fully private altogether to try and make a little bit of money. So that's sort of what's going on here. It's obviously made some people unhappy, but it is a step towards the sort of final, I think it's $10 a day is where it's going to end up in. I think the final date that's supposed to happen is May 2026, April 2026, something like that. So it's a step in this process. Obviously, some parents are upset. But I think probably in many ways a step that any government would be making at this point to try and get its ducks in a row as the rates continue to come down. And as you said, I think it's about $360 for a kid that's in daycare full time, and then there's a lower rate for kids. I think it's about 130 or 170 or something like that for those who are not in daycare full time. You can probably tell that I don't have kids. I only know the price for dog daycare, I'm afraid.
Well, hopefully it's cheaper than that.
It's actually not, but such is life.
Of course.
Give me $10 a day dog daycare, and I'll vote for whatever party.
Wouldn't that be perfect? All right. We don't have a lot of time left, but really quickly, Alberta announced a new investment body to build the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to $250 billion. So with, of course, it could be eased off of revenue resources and financing its budget, mostly from interest from that fund. So what does the plan look like exactly?
Yeah, this is actually a slightly old plan. Premier Danielle Smith sort of first announced this, I think, like 2 years ago, and they're now just maybe sort of putting in the pieces to get this where it needs to go. The idea is basically that when the Heritage Savings Trust Fund was started in 1976, if it had never been raided, if it had never been withdrawn to pay the bills, if money had kept going in, we could basically run the province off of the interest generated from that fund. So what's happening here basically is there's going to be a new investment body. I think it's being given $2 billion worth of seed funding, and it's going to invest it. It's going to invest it more aggressively than the Heritage Savings Trust Fund is managed. It's still going to be arm's length from the government, but it is basically looking to generate maximum returns from that money, which can then be put into the Heritage Savings Trust Fund to grow that quicker than the government setting aside X billion dollars every year to try and grow that fund. So that's what's going on there. How long it'll take, how well it'll work, who knows? But that's what the government's plan is at any rate.
Well, Tyler, it looks like we're out of time here, but thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Tyler Dawson is the legislative reporter with the National Post.
I'm sure you've noticed that life often throws us some curveballs at some very inconvenient times. Well, we're going to get some advice on how to roll with the punches today. Joining us from Virginia is Vonna Lau. She is the CFO at the Evangelical Alliance Mission and author of Glad I Didn't Know, Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings. Vonna, it's great to have you with us today.
It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Vonna, your book highlights the unexpected and often challenging circumstances we face in life. What's this been like for you?
Well, I think I'm probably not unique. It's probably the same for all of us. And there are a number of seasons and challenges that we go through. I like to refer to it as the seasons of life, right? If you're going through something pretty easy right now, it's like, well, enjoy summer because fall and winter are on the way and you're going to have challenges and difficulty. But I found looking back on those that in each one of them, I was able to see how the Lord had worked and that there were lessons that came out of that I'd have completely missed out on if I hadn't gone through those difficult times.
So how does God work in the twists and turns of our lives, even in our painful experiences?
Sure. Well, there are a number of them that are highlighted in this book. In fact, the way it's done, there are 32 short chapters, and each one of those is the story of someone. Half of them are mine and half of them are someone else's, and we can get to that. But each of those is a story about either a challenging time or an unexpected blessing. And as we go through those, we find usually not till the very end or sometimes months or years after, that the result of that was God's blessing. Some of those stories, you'll see that the result of that was a friendship that never would have happened before. One of them in my case was it's how I came to Christ. And if I had not gone through the difficulty of growing up in a divorced home and moving a lot, that was exactly what he used to take me to a Christian school and a godly family that kind of took me in and brought me to the Lord. So there are blessings to be seen if we're willing to look back and see those.
And you describe yourself as an extremely analytical and not a very emotional person, but apparently something happened to you along the way that began to change this. What was that?
Well, I have often said, I think if you did an MRI, I don't have the creative emotional half of my brain. I'm not even sure if it's there because as you said, I'm a chief financial officer, right? I'm very analytical. But as we went through difficult times, especially a number of years ago, losing my brother-in-law to cancer, that caused me to step back. I'm a planner, and you probably have some viewers that are planners as well. And everything needs to be orchestrated just so. And I realized I don't control that, and I'm not able to plan everything. There's someone who's more in control. And so as we went through that and then ultimately lost him to cancer, I remember thinking, okay, we just need to deal with this, get all of the house sold and all of the belongings taken care of. And my husband said to me one day, there are going to be emotions involved in this. And it just struck me that I was willing to just check things off a list and miss out on how I could minister to those people that were around me and understand not only did I have emotions, but there were a lot of emotions involved by other people. And that's true of many of the challenges that we go through. And it gives us the opportunity to invest in people that have been put in our path.
And losing a loved one can take a toll on you. So what were your emotions?
As we were going through this, and it was a time in life, we were fairly young. We had a 2-year-old daughter. We were living in Colorado. He was living in California. So we were commuting back and forth. And I remember being with the CFO actually at Anne Graham Lott's ministry. And we were having dinner one night and she said, "Tell me what's going on in life." And I think it was probably the first time that I stopped and really was allowed to accept what my emotions were and just talked through what I was learning and what we were going through. And I'll never forget, she looked me in the eye and she said, "You're learning lessons that I was in my 50s before I learned." Now, my response was, "I'll wait. I'd be happy to just wait. I don't want these 25 years earlier." But that was such a message for me to understand that's a gift. And I'm able to take these lessons and use them for decades beyond what some other people are able to do. So certainly the emotions ranged from, frustration to sadness and deep grief and anger and inadequacy and all of those things. But at the end of the day, the Lord was sufficient and he was faithful and he was just calling me to be obedient one step at a time.
And you suggest that all families have dysfunction. How did dysfunction in your own family impact who you are today?
Well, I was raised by 2 parents as a single child, and my parents had a really volatile marriage that ended in divorce when I was just 8. I like to tell people that try to figure out personality by birth order. I was an only child, and then within 2 years, my parents both remarried, and I was a middle child in 2 families. So there was a lot of dysfunction to be had there. But it was through those things that, first of all, I thought I was the only one. I was young, I was a child. And then as I got older, I realized, no, this exists in some form in nearly every family. Maybe it doesn't look like divorce, and maybe it doesn't look like moving from being an only child to, having siblings in 2 households. But there are a variety of ways that families suffer and have difficulties that they have to overcome. And so being able to again be open to how can I help others that are in similar situations, and to know God didn't abandon me. He didn't give me something that I couldn't handle. He was walking alongside me even as a child in those situations.
And you mentioned divorce. Why do you say that divorce follows kids through the rest of their lives? Like, what's the long-term effect?
Well, it's the most prominent, right? When they're young, and now are they going to be with mom or are they going to be with dad? And packing a suitcase every weekend. That's what we always think of when we think about kids of divorce. But you fast forward, and eventually those kids are going to get married. And then mom and dad have to behave themselves at the wedding. And who's going to walk the bride down the aisle? Because now there's a dad and a stepdad. Those are things that don't get easier. Holidays were always difficult for kids of divorced parents, right? Well,
yeah,
it's not any different when they're adult kids. And then what made me say that in the book was working with aging parents. And so when you've got one parent that's in Virginia and one parent that's in South Dakota, that's a whole different set of challenges that you wouldn't have if they were together in the same location and caring for each other and just needing some supplemental care.
And what do you mean by, quotes, the pain, strain, and uncertainty were constant and sometimes extreme?
Well, that comes out of a series of events that took place within just a few months. I felt led to leave the job that I had been at for 20 years and really felt like that was a matter of obedience, but certainly was difficult to do that. So stepped away from that job, only to then have that followed up by our oldest daughter having a significant sports injury. 2 weeks later, our house flooded, and then lost my stepdad unexpectedly. And so over the course of 3 or 4 months, had all of those things happen. And so that quote comes from that time, but it was also an opportunity to step back. And again, I would come back to that idea of control, to understand I'm not in control. God is still good, even if this is painful. And there are circumstances that he takes us through. So that's my encouragement to everyone, everyone that's listening and everyone that might read the book, that your circumstances, God's not caught unaware by those. And when the strain and pain seem so difficult, there's still hope in a future.
And your book doesn't just draw on your own experiences. What are some of the other stories you highlight, and how can they help the readers?
You know, it's fun. I was afraid as I got to the end of writing the book, where I'd written all the chapters, that someone would say, well, that's fine. That's how God worked in her life. And they wouldn't apply it to themselves. And so as a result of that, I set aside many of the chapters that I'd written, and I invited 16 other people into the process to share their stories. And when they committed to being part of the project, then I prayed for them each day until they gave me their story, and didn't tell them what I wanted them to write about. And so it was with a little fear and trepidation that I might get, 7 stories about cancer, or 5 stories about wildfires, or, whatever the case might be. But each of the stories is unique in and of itself. And it's so fun to see how the Lord wove those together. So there are 3 stories about people coming to America, and that might be the most common theme that's in there. And they're 3 incredibly unique stories, from a teenager coming with $100 to a mining executive leaving his job in South Africa and coming here, to a business owner in Ethiopia having to flee as a refugee to the United States. So a variety. There are medical situations that are spelled out in there, and different family challenges. So one of the things that people have said is, you read this book today, this one particular chapter might stand out, but if you pick it up again in 6 months or a year, it may be an entirely different story just because of where you are in life.
Now tell us about your miracle baby and how that impacted your faith and family.
So our miracle baby is our youngest daughter, who was tried to be born 4 months early and was born 3 months early in the neonatal intensive care unit. They say that they have early babies and sick babies, and they told us, your daughter decided to do both. So she had significant medical needs. And one of the things that we found when we were in there is, in the neonatal intensive care unit, there are a lot of teenage moms, oftentimes a number of drug babies. just a lot of family situations that are difficult. There were very few intact families there. And so we had the opportunity to minister to the other families that were there as well as the medical workers. But I will say that there were times that it was so difficult as you're watching your child truly at times on the brink of life and death.
Wow.
And so for me, the lesson was that there were people around the world that were praying for her and praying for our situation. And so at those times that I felt like I couldn't even pray, I was too close to it. It was okay. And it was like the Lord said, relax. Other people are praying. And I knew that I was supported by those. And that was just a huge faith builder. I know that not all challenging circumstances come out favorable. And I just mentioned that we lost my brother-in-law. But I'm very happy to say that our 2-pound, 8-ounce baby is now 22 years old, graduated university a year early, and has no lasting effects. So it was a really difficult time, but that one has a really happy ending this side of glory.
That's amazing. Wow. And when our life is in chaos, we often think that we're the only ones. So what would you say to those who feel isolated and alone in their pain?
Well, a couple of thoughts. One, I really came up with that idea is sitting at a stoplight during a time that we were caring for my brother-in-law. And I was probably running an errand, but I remember sitting at the stoplight and looking around at the other cars and thinking life is normal for everybody else today. Every other driver here is just going about their day. They're going to McDonald's, they're going to work, they're doing whatever, and life is not normal for me. And that was a really difficult time to go through. And so now, literally, there are times where I sit at a stoplight and I look around and I think, life's not normal for somebody here, and God be with them. But the other thing that I've just thought of in the last year or so that's been such a comfort is I remember when our girls were little, and I would tuck them in, as most parents do, and we'd pray and sing, and then I'd tell them I loved them and say goodnight and walk out of the room. What I've been impressed upon in the last year is that Jesus tucks us in every night and he says, I love you. And he doesn't leave the room. And he's right there. And so even in these stories in Glad I Didn't Know, I think that's kind of an underlying theme is that Jesus hasn't left. He's right there in the midst of either the unexpected blessing or the difficult challenge that we're going through. And that's my encouragement to everyone today.
Amazing. Vonna Lau is the author of Glad I Didn't Know, Lessons Learned Through Life's Challenges and Unexpected Blessings. Vonna, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.